Hey guys, today we're stepping into the hushed and dangerous corridors of an ancient empire place, where beauty could be as much a curse as a blessing. Imagine being born in a small remote village at the edge of the Han Empire, where rice fields shimmer in the heat and your world is no bigger than the horizon. Life is simple, filled with the sounds of crickets and the warmth of family. But one day, during a local festival, someone notices you. Not for your talent, not for your strength, but for your face, pale as carved ivory, features delicate as porcelain, movements so graceful they seem rehearsed by fate. And in that instant, your fate shifts. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and the local time in the comments. Love seeing where and when you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The whispers start quickly. He would make a perfect offering to the court, someone says. By evening, a provincial magistrate has already summoned your parents. They're handed a small pouch of silver more money than they've ever held, and told their son will live in silken safety, serving the emperor himself. They nod, unable to resist, though your mother's hands shake as she presses her sleeve to her mouth. That night she weeps silently while you sleep, and by morning, you're gone. The journey to the capital is long, cold, and silent. Guards escort you without a word, their eyes deliberately avoiding yours. You want to ask questions, but no one answers. You want to turn back, but there is no way. Each mile takes you farther from the life you knew, each step carving away a piece of your childhood. When at last the palace gates rise before you, they seem less like architecture and more like the jaws of a beast. They swallow the sun, they swallow sound. The great doors close behind you with a boom that feels final. In that moment, even your name is taken. You're scrubbed raw in steaming baths, your hair cut, your clothes stripped. You are redressed not in rough hemp, but in silk that clings like skin, shimmering faintly under the torchlight. But this is no gift. It is preparation. You soon realize you're not alone. There are others, dozens, maybe hundreds boys taken from villages like yours, each beautiful in a way, each obedient, each silenced. You glance around, seeking comfort in their eyes, but find only mirrors of your own fear. Unlike the emperor's wives and concubines, you're not given titles, not entered into records, not honoured in lineage. You're part of something softer in name but darker in reality, special attendants. A phrase crafted to mask the truth, that you have been remade not as a servant or citizen, but as an ornament of flesh, a shadow bent to the desires of power. The eunuchs enforce everything. Their faces are stone, their voices flat, their movements precise. They were once boys too, until knives severed their futures. Now they guard obedience with mechanical indifference. They do not hate you, but neither do they pity you. You are simply property to be trained, moulded, and perfected. Training begins at dawn and ends only when you collapse into restless sleep. You're taught how to bow low enough to flatter, but not so low as to appear insincere. How to walk without sound, to glide rather than step. How to hold your smile faint and controlled, never too wide, never too real. Your voice is softened into something gentle, submissive. Every instinct you had as a child to laugh, to run, to shout is beaten into stillness. And yet, there is elegance in the rituals you learn. You pour tea so gracefully the liquid looks like silk unspooling from a loom. You move with robes that ripple like wind. You recite poems you don't understand but are told you must memorize, because beauty isn't only seen, it is spoken, it is whispered, it is performed. Day by day, your village blurs in memory. The smell of tilled earth, the laughter of neighbours, even your mother's tearful face fades. You're no longer a boy with a past, you're a vessel, hollowed out to be filled with another man's will. Sometimes, at night, You stare at the ceiling and wonder whether the stars can see you from behind these walls of stone and incense. Could they recognize you still? Or are you already gone? And then comes the first lesson from the eunuchs. You are here to be seen, not heard. Their words strike like iron. You're not meant to have a voice, only a presence. But presence here is both a gift and a death sentence. The mornings begin before dawn, when the palace still holds its breath. You rise at the sound of a wooden clapper, sharp and echoing through the corridors like a command from the walls themselves. No words are spoken, words are dangerous. Instead, movement guides you. Bare feet shuffle against stone floors, robes whisper in the dark. The eunuchs wait, eyes unreadable, hands clasped behind their backs. They move like shadows made flesh, always present, always watching. One gesture from them is enough to dictate your entire day. If you stumble, if you bow a heartbeat too late, the punishment is swift. Food withheld, sleep stolen, your thin mattress taken away until the stone beneath you bruises your bones. They drill you not as soldiers but as ghosts. How to kneel without creasing your robes. How to pour wine with a hand so steady it never ripples. How to lower your gaze but never your dignity. Every step, every motion, every breath becomes part of a choreography designed to erase you as a person and remake you as a symbol. And the strangest part? You begin to succeed. Your body adapts. Your laughter, once bright, now hides behind your teeth. Your voice, once free, is pressed flat until it slips out like silk from a loom. The memory of running through fields fades. The sound of your own name dulls. You're vanishing, and the palace applauds it. The eunuchs correct without cruelty, but without mercy. Their indifference cuts sharper than any whip. They are machines fashioned out of broken boys, their humanity taken from them so thoroughly that training others in obedience becomes second nature. Sometimes, when one leans close, you catch the faint scent of incense mixed with iron, and you wonder, do they remember what it was like before? Or have they forgotten, the way you're learning to forget? The palace itself conspires in your transformation. Its architecture is a labyrinth of power and silence. Corridors stretch long and narrow, designed not for comfort but for control. Courtyards open into sudden expanses where you feel small beneath the heavens. Latticed windows cast fractured shadows across the floors, reminding you that even light is filtered here. Every door is taller than a man, every ceiling higher than it needs to be, forcing you to feel diminished. Even the sound of your own breath seems out of place, swallowed by the stone, and there is the incense, always incense, thick coils burning in braziers, winding smoke through the halls until it clings to your hair and robes. It masks the scent of sweat, of fear, of human frailty. It insists on sanctity even in the most profane moments. Some nights, lying on your back, you feel as though you're drowning in it, suffocating under the weight of a fragrance meant to sanctify your silence. You begin to notice how others vanish before your eyes. One boy, quick with a smile, fails to bow deeply enough before a minor prince. The next day, he is gone. No explanation. His bed stripped, his belongings erased. No one dares ask where. His absence is both warning and lesson. You're replaceable. You're invisible. It is in this atmosphere that the phrase becomes a mantra. You're here to be seen, not heard. Whispered by eunuchs, reinforced by the stone, repeated until it roots itself in your bones. You're trained to embody presence without substance, elegance without voice, beauty without will. And yet, somewhere deep within you, a question stirs. What would happen if you laughed? If you shouted your real name into the echoing corridors? If you broke the choreography just once and reminded the world you exist? But you don't. Because here, even imagination feels like rebellion. Instead, you fold yourself smaller, tighter, smoother. You glide rather than walk, You bow rather than meet eyes. You pour tea, you recite lines of poetry you don't understand, you smile faintly, and you erase yourself day by day. Imagine, for a moment, living like this, where even laughter is forbidden. Would you survive, or would you cling to it, whispering jokes in the dark until silence came to claim you? Night comes like a command, and the palace changes its face. Lanterns are lit behind silk screens, corridors soften into honeyed light, and the air grows heavier, as if even the darkness must be formal. You stand in a line with others' robes newly pressed, hair oiled and combed until it shines like lacquer. You have been prepared with the precision of ceremony, the faintest tint on your lips, the slightest kohl at the line of your lashes, the perfume of sandalwood dabbed along the pulse at your throat. You are arranged not as people, but as offerings. The eunuchs pass before you, adjusting a sleeve, correcting a bow, turning a chin 2 degrees toward the floor. You become an angle in a room of angles, all of you converging toward a single point, a door of beaten gold at the far end of the hall. The door opens, no trumpets, no fanfare, no shouted titles. Power here does not need noise. The Emperor's procession moves like a tide guard's first, then attendants bearing trays, then silence. He does not look at you immediately. He passes, and his shadow touches your cheeks like cold water. You do not lift your eyes. You let the moment wash over you and recede, telling yourself it is a rehearsal, a practice, a passing glance. But then the eunuch to your left inhales sharply. A step pauses. The air shifts. His finger points no flourish, just the briefest gesture, and lands upon you. A touch of fate without contact. The eunuch behind you lays a hand on your shoulder. The line ripples as others bow more deeply, suddenly smaller, suddenly relieved it isn't them. You're turned gently, guided by those who know the path by heart, and led away through a side passage where the lamps burn lower and the scent of steam curls from somewhere ahead. The bathhouse opens like a secret, heat lifting in wavering veils. Steam beads on your skin as hands descend upon you soft cloth, warm water, a brush that smells of crushed rice and salt. You're scrubbed until your flesh stings, as if the village dust that still clings to your soul could be scoured off with patience. Oil is poured into your hair, combed through in even strokes. Your eyebrows are shaped. Your nails are smoothed. You're swaddled in linen, then robed again in something so light it feels like moonlight resting on your shoulders. They tie the sash with a precision that makes you ache. You do not speak. You do not ask why. The answer is everywhere and nowhere at once. When they bring the mirror, you almost flinch. The face gazing back is yours and not yours. Your mouth is the same, but it doesn't belong to you. Your eyes are familiar, but they're surrounded by someone else's ritual. You wonder whether this is what vanishing looks like. The same features rearranged by other hands until they feel like a mask that no longer comes off. A eunuch approaches with a bowl of pale liquid. He dips a cloth and touches it to your lips. It tastes faintly sweet, medicinal, calming. Another light brush along your temples, a cool press at the base of your neck. You feel a steadiness settle into your limbs, like the surface of a pond after a thrown stone. The eunuch studies you once, measuring the quiet in your breath, the obedience in your posture, and then nods. The nod is a key. Another door opens. The chamber beyond is lit not by lamps, but by a floating dusk. Silk screens filter the glow until it moves like water gold, amber, smoke. The air hums with a low, steady note, the resonance of a zither string still quivering, or perhaps your own heart joining the sound. Your bare feet sink into rugs that swallow your footsteps. You lower your eyes and follow the guidance of the hand at your elbow until it is no longer there. You kneel. The room receives you like a throat swallowing. Nothing stirs. You do not look upon the Emperor at first, not because you lack curiosity, but because curiosity is a luxury forfeited at the gate. You keep your gaze softened, your breath measured, Your hands loose and open on your thighs, the way you were taught. The faintest rustle of silk and you know he is near. Not a god, not a dragon, not a painted icon on a parade sedan, but a man. This is somehow the most terrifying thing of all. When his shadow falls across your hands, you feel how mortal power is. Warm and near, entirely human. His voice does not come. Instead, gestures. A command shaped by a single tilt of the wrist. The language of the court is movement. You read it as you were trained, leaning into the wordless grammar, finding the sentence inside the silence. You do as you are asked. You do not break. You do not tremble until you are alone. No cruelty occurs, no tenderness either. What happens is ritual, a well-trodden path with no surprises for those who walk it often. Your mind detaches from your body, climbing some invisible ladder to a place where you can observe yourself without feeling the gravity of what happens. You count breaths. You notice the weave of the silk beneath your knee. You remember a winter sun on your village pond, ice thin enough to spider at a touch. You return to your body when the lantern flame gutters and the room comes back into focus with a soft, almost respectful hush. When it is finished, there is no proclamation. There is no reward to declare or punishment to fear. A eunuch appears like a punctuation mark and you rise. A warm cloth is offered. You take it. The door opens again and the world outside has not changed at all. The palace is exactly as it was, the corridors no wider, the ceilings no lower, the night not an inch kinder. But everything inside your ribs is strange. Your footsteps sound foreign to you, as if you're borrowing another person's walk. Back in your small room, a tray waits, broth fragrant with ginger, a bowl of rice polished white, slices of pear arranged in a circle, a kettle breathing steam. The taste lands on your tongue like permission to return to earth. Across the room, your mattress looks almost like a promise. You sit with the hot cloth in your hands until it cools, and then you press it gently to your chest. You find yourself listening for a name, any name, yours or a new one. But the palace offers nothing. It never calls you. It calls upon you. Morning arrives with its wooden clapper, but the day is not the same. The eunuchs who once scanned past you without interest now pause. One nods. A guard who never before acknowledged the existence of your breath now steps aside an inch sooner. The tailor's assistant appears with a bundle, a robe of a finer weave than yesterday's, the collar stitched with a narrow pattern of cloud and wave. You have not been told anything, and yet everything whispers it. Favoured. The word glows like lacquer, beautiful and poisonous. The other boys see it too. They watch you without looking, the way trained eyes do. In a corridor, a friend, if such a word can exist, here asks whether the Emperor's hands are ice or fire. You do not answer, and your silence becomes a story. In the garden, a pair of attendants hold their parasols closer together as you pass, their whispers slipping between the spokes like rain. Someone laughs, too quickly. Someone else goes quiet. You're being lifted by a current you cannot control, and the banks on either side grow thorny. That evening a small ceramic bottle appears in your chamber, its cork tied with silk thread. The label is written in a careful hand, the kind that hides behind neatness. The scent rising from it is floral, pleasant, reassuring. You pour a little into the cup beside it and sip. Your stomach tightens. Not agony, not catastrophe. Just a sharp, curling heat that climbs into your throat and makes your eyes water. You stop. You sit very still while the room sways minutely, like a boat testing its ropes. The heat recedes. You breathe. Later, the eunuch assigned to your wing enters without comment, sees the bottle, and pauses long enough to let you understand. Then he leaves with it. No report is made. No guard is summoned. The palace does not gasp at poison. It nods at it, like weather. You lie awake for a long time afterward, learning a new rule you were never taught. Favor draws knives the way lanterns draw moths. Days fold into themselves. You're summoned again, and not again, and again. Never 2 nights in a row, never publicly. Always through the same quiet machinery of hands and doors and dusk. Power is a tide that touches you and slides back into the sea before anyone can prove their feet are wet. You move into a larger room. The food improves. Your robes find the hands of better launderers. Someone oils the hinges of your door until it opens in silence. You begin to speak less, for the palace has given you a new language, implication. And yet, beneath these gilded adjustments, the truth hums like a low, stubborn note. The emperor is a man, and men tire. Gaze that found you once can pass through you tomorrow as if you are glass. You learn to stand in rooms the way a candle stands in a draught, flame steady in the performance of stillness, even as the air threatens to snuff you at whim. Remember, you were taught to be present, not heard. What no one told you is how fragile presence can be when it depends upon a glance. So you polish yourself to a sheen that does not belong to you. You bow more perfectly than before. You exist like a beautiful rumour, bright and dangerous. You are the favoured shadow for now. Favour is not a door you walk through. It is a balcony without railings. You discover this the way everyone in the inner court does by stepping out into the glow and feeling the drop beneath your toes. Your room moves closer to the heart of the palace, where rugs are thicker and the braziers burn sandalwood that never gutters. The mattress is new, the silk is finer, even the wash basin has a lip shaped like a cloud. You eat alone now, which is meant to be an honour. It feels like a corridor with no turns. The changes are small but decisive. A guard's eyes flicker with recognition when you pass. The laundress curtsies deeper, her gaze tipping to the idea of you instead of the person. A junior eunuch, usually brisk, now smooths a wrinkle from your sleeve with 2 reverent fingers. Nothing is said aloud, nothing ever is, but the palace speaks fluently in touches and half angles. Your steps grow quieter, not from fear, but from calculation. If a glance can lift you, a glance can push. The others sense it. Boys who once sat shoulder to shoulder with you begin to create space, polite and exact, measuring distance in folded knees and averted eyes. In the shade of a ginkgo tree, 2 attendants pretend to discuss embroidery, while their parasols tilt like ears. A third boy, older and quick with a joke, stops mid-sentence when you approach, as if laughter itself might betray him. You want to say their names just to keep the world real, but names are the first things favour erases. You were told to be present, not heard. Now you are visible in a way that turns you into rumour. Even the corridors feel different. The gold flecks in the lacquered beams catch more light. The corridors that once swallowed sound seem to bend it toward you, the tap of your sandals, the hush of your robe. You are learning a new gravity in which you are the thing that pulls. Is this what the Emperor feels? That tug of orbits tightening and loosening at a thought? If so, it is a lonely astronomy. In your private chamber, a low table appears, inlaid with mother-of-pearl cranes that seem ready to lift from the wood. A bowl of plums arrives, dew beading on their skins as if they were harvested from a garden that exists only for you. Next to it, carefully placed, rests a small scroll of poem fragments copied in a neat anonymous hand. Verses on moonlight, on longing, on water that remembers the shape of a jar after it's been poured. You run your thumb along the fibres and feel a tremor of recognition. This is not kindness. It is an assessment of taste. The palace is asking, which poem will you love? Which fruit will you leave untouched? Every preference becomes a lever someone can pull. At dusk, a woman's maid arrives with a tray of pastries glazed to a shine, their fragrance subtle and sure. The maid's eyes do not meet yours. Her voice has the eased weight of someone accustomed to giving gifts that are not hers to offer. For your comfort, she says, and the words place your hands upon a scale you did not ask to hold. You recognize the hand behind the tray, a high concubine whose lacquered nails have scratched their way up these walls for years, Who can read a chart of favour as easily as a physician reads a pulse? Is it friendship she extends, mutual protection, or calculation cloaked as courtesy? You taste the pastry. Sweetness lights your tongue. Then a second flavour, shy and smoky, peels open at the back of your mouth. You stop. You do not swallow. You set the pastry down with a care equal to the care that shaped it. Later, the eunuch who tends your wing lifts the pastry with 2 sticks and drops it neatly into the brazier's ash. He does not look at you. No questions, no theatre. In the palace, disaster is not an event. It is a possibility managed. Why would anyone try to harm you? Because favour is a coin that spends itself. Because the emperor's attention is a candle shared among many, and every wick wants to be the highest flame. Because even a rumour that you sit closer than most can put shadow on another person's plate. Ask yourself, if you were them, if survival required it, what would you do? Would you lace sweetness with sleep? Would you lay out kindness like a trap with silk hinges? You learn. You learn to drink from cups you pour yourself. You learn to arrange your robe so it catches less light. You learn to step back a fraction when 2 wives cross a corridor, letting their perfume sweep past without gathering yours. You learn to offer thanks in phrases that can be read as gratitude or as distance, depending on how they are held up to the lamp. You become a student of evasion, and you listen. The palace gives its secrets away if you hear with the right kind of silence. A steward complains that a certain pavilion requires repairs. Why that one? A physician orders more ginger than usual is someone unwell? A scribe requests a special ink whose letter must not fade? At dinner, a small bowl of salted carp appears before you. The next day, a noteless package on your table contains an identical fish-shaped jade charm. A concubine, famous for her piety, lets her prayer beads clatter once when you enter the temple precinct. Small noises, all of them, yet they accumulate, forming a map of currents beneath the polished floor. One night, you're summoned again not by the golden corridor, but by a plain door under a canopy of wisteria. You pass through rooms you have not seen, the ceilings lower, the lamps bluer, the air cool with a scent like crushed mint. The eunuch guiding you is one of the old ones, voice gravelly, eyes soft with the kind of mercy that is almost memory. Walk as if the floor is painted, he murmurs. Don't smudge anything. The advice strikes you as both instruction and warning. Inside, the emperor is a silhouette against a lattice of moonlight. He turns, and for a heartbeat, he is not a sovereign, but a man listening for an echo within himself. His gaze touches you, then glances away, as if refusing to tell you how much of you he sees. What passes between you is ritual, but ritual can carry the weight of intention, of habit, of the delicate tyranny of familiarity. When it ends, he says nothing. The silence is heavier than words. You leave with the sense of a question half asked in a language you do not yet speak. On your pillow that night, a sprig of osmanthustine gold flowers, scent like apricot and tea waits where your head will rest. The mark is unmistakable. Notice, not promise, not permanence. Notice. You lie awake, the blossom crushed under your cheek until it warms, releasing fragrance like a secret. Do you feel safer, or more exposed? Stories ripple through the harem like moonlight through bars. A junior wife pretends to faint during morning offerings. A favoured musician's string snaps in performance, and somehow the fault is yours. A tray is dropped near your doorway, not in it. Near it, letting the clatter travel farther than any rumour. There is a poetry to the malice here, a choreography that allows everyone to pretend there are no knives because no blood is spilled. You remember the ceramic bottle from before, the sweetness that turned to heat in your throat. The lesson hangs in the air like incense. Lanterns draw moths. Favour draws fire. Still, you are not helpless. You have 2 tools they cannot steal, the quiet and your gaze. You begin to use both. You arrive places the breath before you're expected. You leave a breath before the room changes temperature. You bow to the woman who did not bow to you, and the bow becomes a story she must explain. You give a plum to a kitchen boy, and later find that every dish set before you holds exactly one more sliver of ginger than the emperor's no accident, a signal that someone is watching the rhythm of your pulse. Influence, you realize, is not always top-down. Sometimes it travels in spoons and matches and timing. In the lacquered stillness, you find yourself asking the questions you cannot speak aloud. How long can a glance support a life? How thin can a person stretch before turning to light and passing through the lattice like smoke? If the emperor turned his head away tomorrow, would the floor fall out from under you, or would you learn to walk on air? On a morning of perfect blue, you pass the ginkgo and pause beneath its fan-shaped leaves. The old eunuch, the one with the gravel voice, stops too, as if he's been waiting for you to notice that he has been waiting. Do not mistake a raised platform for a route, he says, as though reciting a proverb. Falling is fast, climbing is slow, standing still is the art. You nod. The lesson is a map. Where to place your feet, how to hold your breath, when to let go of the railing and pretend there never was one. You return to your chamber, to your cloud-lipped basin, to the poem about water remembering a jar, and you understand. Favour has reshaped you like clay turned on a silent wheel. The form is beautiful. The kiln is everywhere. That evening you drink only tea you brew yourself. You eat the plums, but not the pastry. You speak softly to the wall between your room and the next, saying nothing at all. And when the knock comes gentle, 2 beats, then when you rise with the practiced grace of someone who knows, the balcony sways but steps into the light anyway. It doesn't happen with a decree. It begins with a draft, a small coolness that threads beneath the door and steals a corner of the candle flame. One evening passes without summons, then 2. You tell yourself there are councils, audiences, offerings to ancestors. The palace is a city of obligations. You are one lamp among thousands. On the 3rd night, you sit as you've been taught, hands open on your knees, breath like a moth, and watch the corridor for a shadow that does not come. The silence feels polite at first. Then it becomes specific. Small alterations follow, barely worth remarking if you were not trained to notice the shift of dust on a lacquer beam, a robe of slightly coarser weave, ginger sliced a little thicker, as if your tongue has earned less precision. The tailor's assistant measures your sleeve and does not ask you to extend your arm again to check. In the bathhouse, the water is warm, not hot. The lamp outside your door burns down to a stub and no one replaces it before dawn. None of these are unkindnesses. They are adjustments, as if the room itself is deciding the exact size of the story you now inhabit. You pass people who once leaned an inch out of your way. They no longer calculate your orbit. A guard blinks and keeps his eyes where he is paid to keep them. A steward greets you by title, not the shaded courtesy of a beau. The old eunuch with the gravel voice still meets your gaze, but now his nod measures your balance rather than your height. You feel the balcony under your feet, not the view, but the drop. News in the inner court has the texture of rumour even when it is true. From the drift of talk you do not hear, you learn that there is a new boy. Younger, yes. Softer around the mouth, quicker to smile without asking permission. He makes mistakes beautifully. He asks questions that are forgiven because they arrive wrapped in wonder. He laughs once in a room where laughter is treason, and is not punished because the emperor laughs, too surprised by the sound of his own mirth echoing against silk. You're not angry at the boy. You're angry at a law of weather. Your chamber does not shrink, but it seems to. The mother-of-pearl cranes on your table look like birds that have decided not to fly. You pour tea for yourself as you have for others, and the steam rises in a thin, obedient line. You sit with your back straight and your hands gentle, and you wait for a knock that has become theory. You consider standing, walking out past the ginkgo, and through the plain door under the wisteria, the old path your feet can trace blind. But you know what a man looks like when he tries to return himself to a room that no longer contains him. You will not offer the palace an easy parable, so you practice a different craft, retreat without collapse. You wake at the clapper's first strike. You fold your bedding as precisely as on the brightest nights of favour. You polish the low table until the cranes gleam enough to shame the morning. You greet the laundress by name, not to reclaim your place, but to keep your tongue from rusting. You walk the corridors with a stillness that refuses to curdle into sulk or plea. If presence is a candle shared among many, you keep your wick trimmed. In the garden, you pause by a basin where carp drift like slipped coins. Your reflection wavers, not tragic, not heroic, just a face learning how to belong to itself again. A pair of attendants pass behind you discussing the lotus bloom. One says it will open late this year, the other says it will not open at all. Odd, how the ear finds prophecy and botany. You look up, and a cloud slides across the sun with a timing so elegant it might be choreography. For a heartbeat, you want to ask the person listening now, yes, you, in your room, with your own clock glowing, how you endure the moments when a door you loved stops opening. Do you knock anyway? Do you walk away? Or do you sit and learn the grammar of quiet until your breath becomes its own language? You begin to collect small resistances, secret as knots in thread. You memorize a poem not because anyone will ask you to recite it, but because remembering something no one can confiscate is the nearest thing to wealth. You polish the comb left on your table-plane wood, perfect tooth, and you tend to your hair with the same care you once offered your posture in a golden corridor. You brew your tea exactly right. You eat the plums slowly, each bite packed with a body not to dream itself into a shadow. You take the long way to the temple precinct, past a cypress whose bark peels like paper, and you press your palm to its roughness, as if signing your name where no one will look. Not all changes are gentle. A tray arrives with a shortfall 1 fewer pair slice, a small subtraction that signals correctness rather than accident. The junior eunuch who once smoothed your sleeve now smooths someone else's, and when your eyes meet across a corridor, he gives you the gift of looking away. In the training hall, a boy fails to bow, and the reprimand is audible because you are close enough to hear it again. You were always replaceable. Now you have been replaced. The knowledge cools the air in your lungs without freezing it. There are nights when the palace seems to have moved you to the West Wing in spirit, even as your walls remain gilded. Your room hums with a kind of untouchedness, like a shrine after the god has gone travelling. You tell yourself stories you know are not true, that the emperor is ill, that a distant war has taken his attention, that the moon has pulled the tide of desire so far back that no one can reach the boats. You're not the first person to invent mercy for someone who did not offer it. And yet the world refuses to narrow entirely. At dawn, the kitchen sends congee salted just enough to wake your tongue. In the laundry, someone stitches a hidden thread of blue at the corner of your Kalara joke. A kindness, a theft of uniformity. The old eunuch pauses under the ginkgo and bends with the slowness of age to pick a fallen fan-shaped leaf. He does not give it to you. He lets it fall again, teaching by example that some things must be released twice. One afternoon, the plain door under the wisteria yawns as you pass. You do not step through, but you do stop, just long enough for the scent to find you green and cool, a memory of fingers dipped in water. The eunuch beside you murmurs, "Walking past is also a way of entering." You nod. You have always known this in your body, that the refusal to beg is not the refusal to feel. A slip of paper appears on your table, without seal or hand a line from a poem you half remember. Water keeps the shape of the jar after it is poured. You turn the paper over. Blank. You understand. The room is the jar. You are the water. The shape lingers even as the vessel shifts away. Your task is not to become stone. It is to flow without dissolving. That night, when the corridor remains empty, you do something that is not in the training manuals. You unfasten the sash, loosen your robe, and sit on the floor with your back against the wall, and your knees drawn up like a child. You let your breath move out of performance and into life. You say your name not aloud, not loud enough to trouble the lacquer, but with the certainty of someone recalling the path to a door in the dark. The sound is small and exact, and it finds you. In the quiet, you realize the cruelty here is less the loss of favor than the logic that made favor necessary for survival. You were taught to be present, not heard. You were not told that presence manufactured from another person's glance can vanish faster than it arrived. So you craft a different presence, one that answers to you. You set the cup down with a gentle click that acknowledges its own weight. You count the beats between the clapper's strikes in the morning and the dove's small feet on your sill. You notice the moment the incense becomes too heavy and lift the window a hand's breadth, inviting air that does not require permission. And when you wake before dawn, you do not watch the corridor. You watch the light unroll across the floorboards like silk, slow and inevitable. You rise when it reaches your toes. You dress. You smooth the collar where the hidden blue thread sits like a secret vow. You open your door, not to wait for a summons, but to walk. The silence becomes less like an absence and more like a second skin. It stretches over your days until even the act of waiting feels rehearsed. You still move with grace. Habit does not vanish, but it is no longer grace offered to anyone. It is grace performed for yourself, a muscle refusing to forget what it was taught, even when the stage is emptied. One morning, while folding your bedding, a small slip of parchment flutters from the sleeve of your robe. At first you think it's a mistake from the laundress, but the characters on it are unmistakable. A letter. The handwriting is hurried, crooked, almost desperate. It is not meant for you. It is meant for another concubine, a confession of longing, of sorrow, of being unseen even within the very heart of the palace. The words throb with loneliness. You read them again and again, tracing the strokes with your finger as though touching someone else's pulse. For days afterward you cannot let the thought go that even those adorned with titles, silk and jewels carry the same emptiness you do. That loneliness is not reserved for the forgotten, but bleeds across every wall here. You imagine the woman who wrote the hair perfectly oiled, her sleeves embroidered with cranes, her voice soft in the emperor's ear, and still she aches enough to pour her heart onto paper. You feel less like an exception, more like part of a hidden choir humming sorrow into stone. And then impulse seizes you. One night, by the thin light of a single lamp, you take a scrap of paper and begin to write. Not to anyone, not really. You write of your mother's hands, calloused yet gentle, the smell of rain on your village pond, the rough bark of the tree you once climbed. You write about the night you were chosen, the way the magistrate's words closed like a gate around your family. You write about the sound of laughter your own, and how it feels impossible now, like a dream you once believed belonged to you. When you finish, your hand trembles. You fold the letter carefully, press it flat, and slide it into the lining of your pillow. For the first time in years, you sleep without rehearsing stillness, because the words keep watch in your place. But the palace misses nothing. 2 weeks later, during a routine cleaning, the pillow is stripped. The folded scrap is discovered. You are summoned at once. The hall of the eunuch masters is colder than you remember. They do not shout. They do not strike you. They read the letter aloud in their flat voices as if speaking a recipe. Then they ask one question. Who was this for? Your lips part. You could say no one. You could invent a name, blame a servant, pretend it was nothing but practice. Instead, silence pours out of you, heavy and deliberate. It is not courage, not rebellion. It is the only language left that belongs entirely to you. The silence seals your fate. They do not execute you. That would be acknowledgement. That would mean your words mattered. Instead, you're reassigned, erased in plain sight. The West Wing. It is a name spoken rarely, usually in whispers. Not a prison, at least not in the official sense. No bars, no chains, no sentence carved in bamboo strips. But everyone knows what it means. To be sent there is to be filed under forgotten. Your new room is small, damp, and windowless. The walls sweat in summer, crack in winter. The air smells of mildew and extinguished candles. Meals come once a day, a bowl slid silently through the door. You no longer hear laughter or footsteps or music. You no longer see the sky. At first, you pace like an animal in a too small cage. You count the cracks in the wall, the breaths between meals, the faint sounds of guards outside. You whisper poems under your breath, trying to keep your tongue from rotting with disuse. But time here is not counted. It is dissolved. The palace moves on without you. You know this because you can feel it like a river rushing just beyond the wall, water you will never touch. Somewhere, another boy is standing in your place, learning the choreography of presence. Somewhere, another laugh is forgiven because it belongs to someone younger, newer, more alive. Dynasties of desire rise and collapse in the rooms you will never see again, and you, your body, your name, your breath become sediment at the bottom of a current that no longer remembers you existed. But even here, in this narrow chamber, your mind refuses to be still. It builds worlds. You imagine running through a forest at dawn, pine needles soft underfoot. You imagine a woman with kind eyes calling your name, one you've not heard in years. You imagine sitting at a table in the village, sharing hot broth with your father, steam curling between you like prayer. The more vivid your imaginings become, the more they anchor you. It is a trick of survival, one learned by hermits in mountains and prisoners in chains. The body may be locked, but the mind can carve skylines where ceilings press. And still, a question lingers like smoke. How long can you live inside a dream before the dream becomes the only truth? The West Wing is not punishment carved in bamboo or declared by edict. It is something subtler and erasure by design. The palace does not need to cage you when it can simply place you where no one will look. You remain technically alive, technically present, yet already forgotten, as if you'd been brushed from the corner of a scroll before the ink dried. The room they give you is not a cell, yet it feels more suffocating than any chain. The air is damp, cool in a way that clings to your lungs. The walls sweat in summer, weep in autumn, and crack with cold in winter. No sunlight reaches you, not even in slivers. The only rhythm is the thud of a wooden tray at your door once each day food plain, barely enough to remind you that you are still flesh. The eunuch who leaves it never speaks. Sometimes the bowl arrives earlier, sometimes later, but always without explanation, a daily lottery in which the prize is survival. At first you resist. You pace the room, tracing the same 3 steps back and forth until the stone bruises your feet. You whisper poems under your breath, old verses you were forced to memorize, once meaningless, now lifelines. White dew on the autumn grass, stars scattered like salt in the sky. You cling to rhythm because rhythm is memory, and memory is proof you have not dissolved entirely. But resistance frays. Weeks blur into months. Your skin pales to the colour of parchment. Your voice rusts from disuse. You speak aloud sometimes, only to hear the echo, only to remember that sound belongs to you. The echo is faint, almost embarrassed. It reminds you that walls, too, are listeners, though they never answer. Your body weakens. Muscles soften from disuse. Bones jut sharper. You're taller now, but the growth feels stolen, as if your body stretched in protest of confinement, a tree forced into crookedness by a ceiling too low. The palace has trained you to move like silk, but here you stumble. There is no need for elegance in a room no one enters, yet your mind refuses to yield entirely. It invents. It dreams. At night, you close your eyes and imagine another self, a boy who escaped, who ran into the mountains, who found freedom among pines and rivers. You narrate his life as if telling a bedtime story. He grows strong. He finds love. He fathers children who laugh without fear. In your mind, he lives everything you cannot. At times, the dream feels so real that you wake with the echo of laughter in your throat, and for a heartbeat, you believe you were somewhere else. But reality always returns. The cracks in the wall stare back at you, stern and unchanging. Damp creeps into your bones until even your dreams feel cold. Sometimes, the guards forget you for a day. The food does not come, and your stomach claws at itself. You press your ear to the floor, listening for footsteps, any sign that the world has not erased you entirely. The silence is worse than hunger. Silence becomes its own form of starvation. One night you crawl to the corner where the wall and floor meet. You press your ear against the cold stone and pretend you can hear the palace breathing. The footsteps of eunuchs, the laughter of wives, the low hum of music carried on distant air. You tell yourself the empire still moves, that it is not entirely gone, that you're still tethered to a living world, even if only by sound. And yet the longer you remain, the more the world outside feels imagined, and the more your dreams feel real. You stop counting the days. Counting is for people who expect an end. You no longer expect, you only drift. And here, in the West Wing's suffocating silence, a thought begins to whisper, perhaps this is the true punishment. Not pain, not death, but being unremembered. Not erased with violence, but allowed to fade until no one can prove you ever existed. Tell me, if it were you, if you lived in a room where no one spoke your name, where years dissolved into airless silence, how long before you would start to wonder if you were ever real? Your body begins to speak in a language you can't misinterpret. Knees that once knelt like folded paper now creak like doors swollen by rain. Fingers that learn to pour tea without a ripple tremble when you lift the bowl that arrives once a day. Your hair grows into uneven ropes. You break it with your fingers because there is no commonly memory of one. Smooth and wooden, each tooth perfect as the crescent of a moon you no longer see. The room has thinned you to essentials, bone, breath, and a stubborn, embering will that refuses to blink out. At first, you think of health as a ledger, eat, rest, keep the accounts balanced. But the West Wing doesn't accept arithmetic. It taxes you in stranger coin. Sleep stops healing. It only passes time. Hunger doesn't sharpen. It blurs, like ink sponged with water. You try small exercises, pressing your palms to the wall, holding yourself up on shaking arms. Yet even that becomes ceremonial, a choreography performed for the ghost of an audience. When you sit back down, your heart stutters with a bird's panic and then settles, ashamed of its noise. Your skin learns the room. It knows the cold seam where the floor meets the wall, the damp exhalations that rise in the hour before dawn, the place on the stone that warms slightly under your left shoulder if you lean long enough. You could find those patches blind. You often do. The darkness here is not the drama of midnight. It's the mild, endless dusk of a shuttered storeroom. Time does not divide itself by light and shadow. It pools. Still, the mind, disobedient animal that it is, continues to flee. It slips the leash of the West Wing and runs. You wake inside imagined mornings, warm with the smell of millet porridge and sweet smoke. You hear your mother's voice, rough from night air, calling a name that used to fit you cleanly as a bracelet. In those moments before the room returns, you believe in a different world, with the same confidence you once believed in the Emperor's shadow. Then the bowl thuds at the door and the old world reclaims you by weight and habit. The guards have begun to treat you like a rumour that keeps walking. New ones peer in the crack of the door as if confirming an old tale. Their eyes snag and slip away, not from cruelty but confusion, as though you were the last page of a book no one expected to find. Once, a younger guard bare cheeks. A pimple bright as lacquer meets your gaze too long and startles, dropping the ladle. The clatter runs down the corridor like news. He returns, flustered, cheeks burning, mouth full of an apology he does not know how to deliver to someone who is not supposed to exist. You lift a hand in something like a blessing. He flees, relieved to avoid the sacrilege of receiving mercy from a ghost. Old teachings surface in the quiet. Stories of monks who fasted in caves until visions came like birds, of sages who stood for years on one leg under icy waterfalls, of hermits who wore grooves into mountain paths walking the same 12 steps in prayer. You try to take comfort in the kinship, to imagine your suffering inscribed within a tradition of chosen austerity. But the truth pinches. They chose. You were chosen. Choice is a fire that warms even while it burns. Without it, the cold is different. It goes bone deep. Loneliness graduates into something else. Not an ache, not an emptiness, but a medium like water for a fish. You move inside it, you breathe it, you forget there was another element. Days arrive without edges. You think, this is how a vase feels. Space kept in a particular shape by walls that never look at it. Remember the poem about water taking the form of a jar even after it's poured? You feel the opposite. You feel your shape remembering the jar that is no longer here. You begin telling stories aloud because the air needs names. You tell them to a knot in the baseboard, to a hairline crack that crawls upward like a climbing vine, to the old nail whose head sits proud of the plaster. You speak evenly, as to a pupil. You start with the boy who escaped the palace, your shadow twin, your exile self. In your mouth he grows. He finds a small house with a roof that thatches itself from spring reeds, a woman with hands that smell of sesame, a daughter who laughs with her whole face. He walks by a river where the current is so clear you see pebble, weed, fish, sky, and yourself, not as you are, but as he is. You give him a scar on his wrist where a dog bit him when he was 8, and you press your thumb against your own wrist until it hurts, a ritual of swapping. One night, as you instruct your imaginary daughter how to balance on a log over the water arms out, knees soft the wall answers, a soft, answering thud, like a fist-testing distance on the other side. You freeze. It comes again, more cautious, then stops. You press your ear to the cold. Nothing. You become scientist and believer at once, testing the sound against the corner, the middle, the seam near the floor. You hear only the grand silence, the Empire's breathless postscript. In the morning you decide you invented the noise, but the decision does not convince you. Hope is a stubborn creature. It lives on crumbs. Hunger changes your dreams. They brighten. Colours become impossible. Greens like ground malachite. Reds like lacquer freshly poured. Food arrives with a painter's cruelty plums whose skins glisten like wet silk. Bowls of rice that shine as if lit from within. Carp sliced thin as whispers. You taste. You laugh. You wake with your teeth sinking into your tongue. You learn to sit up before sleep leaves to check the bowl, the seam, the damp, naming each thing you see like a sailor keeping watch. Wall, floor, tray, breath. I am here. Your body continues its plain speech. Gums bleed when you chew, knees swell, a cough grows thready and refuses to leave. You're no physician, yet you recognize deficiency by its manners. You coax, you bargain. You sip the thin broth slowly to trick satiety into visiting. You rub your calves to remind the muscles they belong to limbs that once moved like silk. You sing in a whisper, the old words restored to purpose. If poetry was training before, now it is medicine. White dew on the autumn grass, the syllables tap like a wooden fish in a temple, keeping time for a heart that forgets. And still, the imagination refuses obedience. It begins to overlay your cell with a second architecture. A window appears and vanishes, shifting like a bright fish in silt. A square of moonlight plants itself on the floor at precisely the wrong angle, your mind's rebellion against geometry. The seam where the wall meets the floor becomes the lip of a stage. You watch yourself cross and recross it, tiny and stubborn, a toy figure powered by invisible clockwork. Is this madness? Or a faculty the palace tried to train out of you resurfacing in defense? If you are listening now in a room far from this one, tell me, how many days alone before your mind begins to paint doors on walls? Would you open them? Or would you sit patient as winter until the paint dried and the idea of leaving stopped fluttering in your chest? Once, when the tray arrives late so late your stomach is more flame than bowl, You fold yourself to the floor and place your ear against the stone. There, the faintest thrum, not footsteps, music. A zither string plucked and allowed to ring into silence. One note, then nothing. It could be a hallucination fashioned from an old memory, the echo of a court performance migrating through stone like a migrating bird through fog. You roll the note on your tongue like a seed. You plant it. It grows into a tree in your head, a ginkgo that remembers autumns you do not witness. Seasons pass without proof. You pace your own calendar. The cough worsens winter. The mildew thickens summer. The bowl arrives with more ginger somebody somewhere has taken ill. The guard's breath smokes cold. Their sandals squeak rain. Your body becomes a barometer with no window to confirm its readings. You accept the readings anyway. Certainty here is a kindness you craft for yourself. On a day when the air feels thinnest, you sit with your back to the wall and rest your palm against your heart. Thin, tired, loyal. You think of the Emperor human after all, warm and mortal, and wonder what became of the boy who laughed in a forbidden room. You do not hate him either. Your anger has no teeth left. It has worn itself into a smooth stone you keep in your pocket and rub when you need to remember you once could bite. The story you tell grows quieter. The escaped boy's daughter becomes a woman with her own soft-voiced child. You give the child your mother's hands. You place in those hands a wooden comb, not broken this time, whole and heavy and real. In your mind, the teeth find your hair, and the tug is sweet. You close your eyes around that feeling and breathe until the room blurs and the image holds. If a person is a map, you think, then memory is the ink that doesn't fade when the parchment is left in the rain. The palace can smudge, wipe, scrape, but it cannot stop the faintest lines from insisting. You press your fingertips to the floor and whisper your name not as petition, not as defiance, but as cartography. The letters land. They stay. You are thinner than you have ever been. You are older than your years. You are more yourself than the palace ever permitted. Your breath comes and goes. Your mind keeps building rooms with windows. In one of them, a door opens. You do not yet know whether you will walk through. You only know that, even here, you're still the water, remembering the jar, refusing to forget the river. One morning, you wake already lying on your side, knees drawn to your chest the way a child sleeps when the night is colder than the blanket. The breath that used to arrive like an obedient servant now comes as a visitor who pauses at the door, considers, and sometimes decides not to enter. You do not fight. Fighting was for corridors with lanterns and rooms with mirrors. Here you greet the air the way a host greets a difficult guest with patience, and a little ceremony your body still remembers. Inhale as if lifting a teacup. Exhale as if setting it down without a sound. The room makes a small inventory of you. The ridge of your hip pressed against stone. The ache that lives behind your sternum like a lodged seed. The fine tremor in your fingers when they reach for the bowl and change their mind halfway. You have learned the trick of conserving motion not out of laziness, but reverence. Each movement is the last of its kind, a species you want to keep from extinction. You turn your head a fraction and watch the seam of the wall like a horizon line in a land with no sky. When the tray does not come, hours stack without weight. Your stomach is quiet, not because it has no complaints, but because it has run out of words. Later, how much later, you cannot measure a shoe scuffs outside, then 2 careful taps on wood, then the slide of the door as if the door is shy of being opened. The bowl enters. It stops halfway, as though the hand that pushes it has seen enough. There is no voice, not even the breath of one. The door closes. You do not reach for the bowl, not because you refuse food, but because the act of reaching has become a geography for which you no longer own a map. You let the scent come to you. Thin broth, a thread of ginger, yesterday's rice warmed again. The fragrance is a kindness you do not waste by turning it into an appetite you cannot satisfy. You think of the poem you memorized. White dew, autumn grass, and realize you have been speaking it with your body all along, each bone a syllable paired to meaning. Time is not a river now. It is a lake holding stillness under a skin of light. In that stillness, something opens quietly. Not a door, not a window. Something inside that has been locked against itself unbars with the softest click. You do not see your village, you feel it. The smell of millet flour on your mother's fingers. The warmth of afternoon dust that clung to your calves when you ran, allowed to be loud. The laughter that you gave to your shadow twin in stories returns to you less sound than shape. A roundness in the chest where air used to snag. You do not cry. Tears are for asking. You're not asking anymore. You are attending. When your breath leaves without returning for a count you once would have called dangerous, you follow it a little way down a corridor you cannot name. There at last the pressure eases. A hand, not a real one, a memory of a hand touches your brow the way the eunuch once pressed a cool cloth to your temples before leading you into dusk. Only this time the gesture is yours. Permission, given at last by the only person left to grant it. They find you like that. A chambermaid new enough to make mistakes opens the door at the wrong hour. She's not prepared for the sight of a person who has rearranged himself into stillness so completely that stillness accepted the arrangement. Her scream is brief and tidy. It ricochets off the corridor and makes a couple of guards appear as if drafted by sound. A senior eunuch arrives, then the old one, the gravel-voiced map of a man who taught you to stand on a swaying balcony. He does not kneel. He does not need to. He looks once, not for proof. You require none but to mark the moment with his eyes, so it will not be entirely lost to the palace's appetite for forgetting. There is no procession, no priest, no bell. Your body is wrapped in cloth that was once white, now a practical grey of many washings. It is honest cloth. It tells the truth about use. They carry you through a corridor you have never walked, past storerooms that keep the Empire's spare seasons, out into air that smells of leaves. The sky is enormous in a way that would have frightened you if you were awake. Leaves move without permission. Light falls where it wants and does not ask whether you are looking. They take you to the back garden. Not a garden that appears in poems or festivals. No red bridges over koi. No pavilions with silk-voiced instruments, but the necessary edge of the palace's breathing. Piles of broken pots, a stack of old lattice work, a crooked tree that no one has tended in a generation. This is where the palace keeps its forgetting. There is a narrow square of ground soft enough to open. A shovel enters the soil with the sound of someone clearing a throat before saying a difficult thing. In China, rites matter. The way a body is washed, the direction it is carried, the words said above it, the compass points that decide where a head should rest. These are not decorations. They are the grammar of goodbye. They bind the living to the dead and the dead to the earth, ensuring the family line continues with the approval of heaven and the consent of ancestor tablets that watch like kind judges. To be denied that grammar is a cruelty larger than one life. It robs a person not only of honour but of orientation. It denies the living the work of grief and the dead the address of home. You're given none of it, not because you are despised, because you are inconvenient to remember. Anonymity is the most efficient ritual here. The old eunuch watches the shallow grave grow. His face does not change. He has learned to keep his water inside its jar. When the hole is ready, they lower you in with care that is almost reverent not for you, exactly, but for the work itself. Even neglect prefers neatness. Before the first shovelful of earth falls, the old eunuch pauses. He reaches into his sleeve, fingers fishing past thread and habit, and brings out a small wooden comb. He found it long ago, half buried near the same crooked tree, smooth from years of rain and the touch of curious hands. It is broken, 3 teeth missing, 1 tooth worn to a nub. He lays it beside your shoulder, as if returning a word to a sentence, No one remarks upon it. The comb is a tiny ceremony smuggled into a day that officially has none. The earth receives both of you with the same patient mouth. They tamp the ground with the flat of the shovel, not harsh, not gentle, just sufficient. No marker is placed. The crooked tree leans, deliberating whether to shade this spot when summer comes. The old eunuch looks at the soil until looking becomes a kind of speech. He does not bow, he does not dare. But he leaves a space in his breath where a bow would go. Then he turns and walks away with the slow economy of someone who has learned that haste does not change endings, only the way you arrive at them. The palace closes around the absence like lacquer poured over a floor. Rooms refill, trays resume their routes. Somewhere a new robe is measured. Somewhere a boy laughs and is forgiven. The west wing keeps its quiet. The crooked tree keeps its counsel. Rain falls on a night that has no reason to remember you, and yet, for a few minutes, arranges itself like incense smoke, as if performing the memory of a name. Your comb lies in the soil, teeth to the east, as if prepared to tidy whatever wind disarranges. It is not a relic. It is not a miracle. It is an object with work left in it, useless where it lies, and yet necessary because it insists that a person once had hair and a hand to care for it. In another world, the comb would be set upon a shelf in a quiet house, lifted each morning, passed through strands that smell faintly of osmanthus, placed back with a sigh. Here, underground, it keeps time. Wood remembers even when people choose not to. If you listen now, Yes, you, still awake, the fan murmuring in your room, you might hear how erasure masquerades as order, how silence dresses itself as peace. You might feel the weight of a ritual withheld, and wonder how many names in your own life have been tidied out of sentences because they did not fit neatly under a title. When stories falter, objects speak. A broken comb, a blue stitch hidden at a collar, a ginkgo leaf dropped twice. These are the footnotes that refuse to stop being feet. The earth settles. The crooked tree leans a little nearer, perhaps just wind, perhaps a witness. And the palace, master of forgetting, continues, confident that it has finished the work. It has not. Memory is a stubborn animal. It burrows. It seeds. It waits. A week after the soil settles, the palace composes itself as if nothing has been disturbed. It is very good at this. The lamps are trimmed to the exact height of obedience, the corridors hold their breath, and the golden door at the end of the hall receives a new procession of sandals polished to a shine. Your absence is a flaw that lacquer knows how to swallow, yet lacquer preserves as much as it hides. Beneath the gloss, a hairline crack insists. One afternoon, the old eunuch wanders the back garden with a ledger he does not bother to open. He stops where the earth is faintly newer, where the crooked tree leans as if listening to something below. He does not kneel. He lets his gaze place a marker no stone will ever own. From his sleeve, he draws the habit of memory like a thread and ties it to nothing, trusting the knot to hold in air. He does not say your name names a currency here, and he is poor, but you can feel the shape of it passing through him. A bowl carried empty and yet heavy because of what it once contained. Later, another eunuchion, grave, hopeful in the way a person is hopeful, before the palace teaches a different definition, passes the same spot and frowns at the ground for reasons he cannot explain. He lifts his foot, sets it down again, and tells no one that the earth felt like a page with writing under the blank. This is how rebellion begins in a place like this, not with banners, but with a body remembering to hesitate. Poems move the way contraband always moves, by hand, by whisper, by the courtesy of those who pretend not to see. A scullion finds a slip of paper under a bowl, 7 lines about a shadow boy who poured tea like a river and learned to breathe in a room with no window. The scullion cannot read, but he knows treasure when it looks back at him. He folds the paper and places it in a crack behind a pillar where other treasures live. A hair ribbon, a game stone, a pebble that looks like a cloud. A month later, the paper is gone, and the game stone sits on the corridor sill like a new punctuation mark. You cannot prove a poem existed. You can only notice the shapes it leaves in the air. You're no longer a person in the palace. You're a temperature. Rooms hold you the way a hand holds the memory of heat after a cup is set down. A musician tuning a zither before dusk pauses at a note that feels like a corridor you once walked. She cannot name the corridor, but she lifts the string until the sound clicks into the right sadness. A seamstress rethreads her needle and unpicks 3 stitches for reasons that live below language. The correction makes the collar lie with an obedience that feels less like surrender and more like grace. A boy learning to bow watches his own hands and once looks up too far. He expects punishment. None comes. He does not understand that mercy sometimes arrives because the person who would have scolded him is busy listening for a name he has been trying not to remember. Beyond the walls, the empire keeps its calendar. Governors fall out of favour, taxes are counted, edicts are read in public squares where dust piles itself in careful drifts on officials' shoes. Somewhere, a scholar writes about rights and hierarchy, placing words like stones across a river he has never crossed. Somewhere, a war in a far province requires a list of names to be etched with a knife on a wet bamboo strip so they will not fade. Somewhere, a midwife washes her hands in a basin, humming to a child who has not yet decided whether to arrive. None of them know you. All of them live in a world shaped by the same gravity that bent you into the shape you held. History condenses the palace into categories: emperor, empress, concubine, eunuch, attendant. Records tidy desire into roles, devotion into archives, cruelty into margins. But categories cannot hold shadows. They assign title and stipends. They do not list the way a person breathes when fear moves into his chest and refuses to pay rent. They will not mention the faint blue stitch hidden in your collar or the way you once placed a plum on a kitchen boy's tray, because kindness needed somewhere to sit. They will not print a map to the crooked tree, and yet memory works in different ink. It writes under the official script, not erasing but illuminating the dent of a bowl on a table, the warmth worn into a wooden comb by hands that outlived their author. A palace that trains itself to forget cannot control the artifacts that refuse to obey. A nugget of jasmine wax found caught in a floorboard, a sleeve polished smooth where a person clutched it to stop his hands from shaking, a poem about water remembering its jar. When the archaeologies come centuries late and armed with brushes finer than cosmetics, they will read the grain of wood and the direction of wear. They will say, "A person was here, tender and terrified." You were never singular. The cruelties that shaped you were efficient because they were practiced. Across empires, across centuries, rooms have been built to domesticate beauty, to weaponize obedience, to braid desire into government. A Byzantine chamberlain learns the language of curtains and survives by never stepping an inch outside of shadow. A Mamluk page practices the stillness of a spear until he becomes its patience. An Ottoman boy, kidnapped by wind and decree, learns the arithmetic of glances in rooms painted with tulips that never wilt. The names differ. The rooms rhyme. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen? The human willingness to endure the absurd for a promise of protection did not begin in Egypt and did not end with cosmetics. We smear ourselves with what power prescribes, and sometimes we call it perfume. Does this sound far from you, listening now in your own dim room, the fan making a soft weather above your bed? Consider how often your worth has been measured by a glance, a metric, a number scrolled past by a thumb. Consider the rooms you have entered because the door finally opened, and the rooms you have stood outside long enough to learn the patterns of footsteps within. Consider the messages you've written and hidden, not because you feared a whip, but because your voice felt safer between a pillow's seams than in someone's ear. If you were carried by a tide of attention and set down gently a season later, did you learn to breathe again? Or do you still hold your breath when your phone glows? The old eunuch grows older. He walks more slowly beneath the ginkgo and pauses more often at the place the ground remembers. On a day when the sky's the clean blue of a washed bowl, he stops, places his palm over the soil and imagines, absurdly, combing it smooth. It is not piety. It is maintenance. He has served the palace so long that even his grief must be practical. He presses, releases, and leaves the ground uncreased. It is more merciful to let the earth be rumpled where it has a right to be. Years will pass. The crooked tree will throw dapple and shade, then drop leaves like small, deliberate hands. The west wing will swallow new names and untie them without ceremony. Musicians will tune to the corridor's sadness and call it fashion. A scholar with a nervous cough will copy a quatrain that mentions a boy whose name he spells 3 different ways, because certainty is a luxury poem's refuse. Perhaps a maid, new to the corridors, will find a tooth of wood when heavy rain exposes an edge of buried comb. She will slip it into her sleeve, thinking of nothing in particular, and carry it home. There, on a shelf above a basin, it will sit catching light, a small piece of memory posing as trash. What remains? Not a title, not a stipend, not a line in a genealogy register with a red stamp that blesses you into permanence. What remains is smaller and more stubborn, the insistence that someone once breathed and arranged his hands carefully on his knees because he had been taught that even stillness must be a craft. What remains is a trace you can feel with your fingers, like writing carved into the underside of a table where a child hid from chores and practiced his name. If history is the emperor's edict, memory is the eunuch's nod in a back garden where no one is watching. One shouts, the other endures, and here you are, reading or listening long after the lacquer hardened, your chest rising and falling in a room that is safer than the West Wing, and yet vulnerable to its own silences. Are you willing to carry a sliver of this story with you into your morning? Will you notice the unnamed hands that lay your world out each day? Will you speak softly and precisely a name you almost forgot to someone who needs to hear it? This is how erasure is answered. Not with monuments alone, but with mouths that refuse to let the small truths starve. The crooked tree keeps its counsel. The comb keeps its quiet work underground. The palace continues, and Memoria, stubborn animal, burrows seeds, waits, and then, when called, stands up. We've reached the soft shoreline of the story now, where waves arrive thin and even, each one smaller than the last. Let the room be dim. Let the fan keep its low weather. The palace is far away. Even its shadows have grown tired and lain down. What remains are gentle things. A wooden comb warmed by a palm, a ginkgo leaf shaped like an open hand, a thread of blue hidden where only the wearer will know. Breathe as if you're polishing those objects with your breath slow in, slower out letting their edges blur until they are simply shapes resting on a table in a quiet house. If there was cruelty, it's distant now, folded into the long fabric of years. What holds nearer is the resilience that refuses to vanish. A person learning to keep a small flame alive in a room with no windows, a memory that outlasts lacquer, a whisper that remembers the sentence it belongs to. Think of lavender pressed between page, show it dries into a different colour but keeps its kindness. How opening the book years later releases a rumour of summer into a winter room. That is how stories endure. As a soft fragrance, a faint colour, a feeling you recognise before you can name. Let your shoulders drop the way curtains do at evening. Let your jaw unfasten like a sash. If a thought knocks, you can answer tomorrow. For now, give the mind larger rooms. A garden where light falls wherever it wants. A path that leads past water clear enough to remember your face kindly. The boy's name is not printed here, but you can lend him one for the night and let it drift back to silence as you sleep. Close your eyes. The crooked tree is keeping watch. The wind is reading aloud from a page it has carried a long time. You're safe. You're seen. You can rest. End of script. Sweet dreams.